Elythria appeared through the observation glass like a secret the universe had been reluctant to share. Violet clouds curled around floating mountains of crystal, each one suspended above the planet by ancient gravity engines buried deep inside their cores. Rivers of blue light crossed the continents in glowing veins, and above the northern hemisphere, 3 silver moons moved in perfect formation. Daniel Carter stared at the view and forgot, for several seconds, that he was supposed to be a professional representative of humanity. "That cannot be natural," he murmured. Beside him, Ambassador Harlan adjusted the collar of his ceremonial uniform. "Neither is your posture. Stand straight." Daniel obeyed, although the observation deck tilted slightly as the diplomatic shuttle entered Elythria's atmosphere. A service drone floated toward him. It was small, round, and polished gold with a glowing panel on its front. Daniel smiled. "Finally, coffee." The drone sprayed his jacket with a cloud of antiseptic mist. The Elythrian attendant standing nearby covered her mouth, but not quickly enough to hide her laughter. Daniel looked down at his damp uniform. Strong flavor. The attendant's long ears lifted slightly, an Elythrian sign of amusement. By the time the shuttle landed at the royal platform, Daniel smelled like a hospital corridor, and had earned the nickname Disinfected Human among at least 6 members of the welcoming staff. The capital city rose around him in impossible layers. Towers of translucent stone spiraled into the sky, linked by bridges made of solid light. Silent vehicles moved through the air without wings or engines. Far below the platform, enormous trees glowed beneath their silver leaves, their roots connected to the city's energy network. At the center of it all stood the royal palace. It had no visible doors. Daniel stopped at the base of the shining structure. "How do we enter?" The attendant raised one hand. The palace wall rippled and opened like water. Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Of course, walls are optional here." Ambassador Harlan gave him a warning glance. "I'm being culturally respectful," Daniel whispered. "You're talking to architecture." It opened for me. They entered a vast hall, where hundreds of Elythrians waited in silence. They looked almost human, but their long, elegant ears and faintly luminous eyes made them unmistakably alien. Royal guards stood in dark armor that shifted like liquid metal over their bodies. Above them, floating crystal spheres projected constellations that changed with every step. At the far end of the hall stood Queen Vaelora. She wore a gown woven with threads of silver light. Her white hair fell over her shoulders, and a narrow crown hovered a few centimeters above her head, held in place by a magnetic field. Her long ears were decorated with tiny blue stones that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Daniel had met admirals, presidents, and warlords. None of them had possessed the queen's stillness. She did not need to raise her voice or display a weapon. The entire hall seemed to arrange itself around her presence. "Welcome to Elythria," Vaelora said. "May this visit become the beginning of trust between our peoples." Ambassador Harlan stepped forward and delivered the prepared response. Daniel listened politely, though half his attention drifted toward the translucent curtains above the throne. Someone was watching from the balcony. A young girl stood behind the crystal veil. She appeared perhaps 12 years old, with dark silver hair, pale skin, and the same long ears as the queen. Her eyes were bright green, far too observant for a child. She wore no crown, only a simple white dress with glowing blue patterns moving slowly across the fabric. Princess Serina. Daniel knew the official reports, born mute, brilliant, rarely seen by outsiders. She watched him without blinking. Daniel shifted awkwardly and offered a small smile. The princess did not smile back. Instead, she placed one hand against her heart. The gesture was slow and deliberate. Daniel felt something strange move through him. Not pain, not fear, but a sudden pressure behind his eyes. For one impossible moment, he saw a place he had never visited. A dark chamber beneath the palace, rows of black crystals, and a golden symbol burning above a sealed door. Then the vision vanished. He stumbled half a step. Ambassador Harlan whispered, Are you unwell? Probably the coffee. You did not drink coffee. Exactly, withdrawal. High above them, Serina remained perfectly still. Queen Vaelora followed her daughter's gaze. The queen's expression changed so slightly that most of the hall missed it, but Daniel saw the sudden tension in her face. She looked at him not as a guest, but as a question she had been afraid to ask. Far beneath the palace, systems older than the royal bloodline awakened one by one. Dust fell from a forgotten ceiling. Ancient conduits filled with light. Inside the archive of echoes, a black crystal that had remained silent for 4,000 years opened like an eye. A voice emerged from the darkness. The guardian has returned. On the balcony, Serina lowered her hand from her heart. Then, for the first time since the delegation arrived, she smiled. The welcome ceremony ended beneath a rain of artificial starlight projected from the palace ceiling. As the delegates followed their guides toward the banquet chambers, Daniel glanced back at the balcony, but Princess Serina had disappeared behind the crystal curtains. Queen Vaelora had not. She remained beside the throne, watching him with an intensity that made him wonder whether he had broken some sacred law by smiling at a royal child. Considering Elythria's technology, the punishment might involve being launched into orbit as a diplomatic firework. Daniel decided not to ask. The banquet hall had been grown rather than built. Its pale walls curved like the inside of a giant shell, and living silver vines carried glowing fruit across the ceiling. A long table floated a few centimeters above the floor, adjusting its height whenever a guest approached. Daniel's chair inspected him with a blue scanning beam before allowing him to sit. "Is it judging me?" he asked. The Elythrian attendant beside him tilted her head. "It is measuring your skeletal structure." That sounds like judgment with extra steps. A plate formed from liquid glass in front of him. Seconds later, a machine beneath the table produced a steaming violet sphere. Daniel stared at it. The sphere stared back. Two tiny eyes opened on its surface. He slowly lowered his fork. "I think dinner is alive." "It is not alive," the attendant assured him. "It only reacts defensively." "That is not reassuring." Across the table, Ambassador Harlan was already cutting his portion. The violet sphere squeaked. Daniel pushed his plate away. Humanity did not cross 40 light-years to be screamed at by pudding. A soft, breathless sound came from the archway. Serina stood there with one hand covering her mouth. She made no voice, yet her shoulders shook with silent laughter. Two royal guards waited behind her, both attempting to look solemn while the princess pointed at Daniel's frightened meal. Daniel leaned closer to the sphere. "You have humiliated me before royalty." The sphere blinked. Serina entered the hall and sat beside her mother. Queen Vaelora's expression softened as she watched her daughter, but the warmth vanished when Serina's eyes returned to Daniel. Throughout the meal, the princess continued observing him. She ignored the diplomats discussing trade routes, ignored the holographic maps of wormhole corridors, and ignored a minister who spent several minutes explaining the taxation of antimatter freight. Daniel could hardly blame her. Even the minister appeared bored by himself. When the banquet ended, a palace servant approached Daniel. "The Queen requests your presence in the Hall of Memory." Ambassador Harlan immediately stood. "I will accompany him. The invitation is for Daniel Carter alone." Harlan looked at Daniel as though preparing to offer useful advice, then settled for, "Do not cause an interstellar incident." "I'll keep it small." The Hall of Memory lay deep inside the palace, beyond corridors where portraits moved and whispered to one another. Some were not portraits at all, but preserved neural echoes of long-dead rulers. Their translucent faces turned as Daniel passed. One elderly king frowned at his clothing. Daniel looked down. "You've been dead for 8 centuries. Let me have the jacket." At the end of the corridor, a circular door opened without being touched. Queen Vaelora waited inside. The chamber contained thousands of floating crystals, each holding fragments of recorded history. Blue light crossed her face as she stood beside Serina. The princess held a small mechanical creature in her hands, a six-legged maintenance drone with one bent antenna. "You saw something during the ceremony," Vaelora said. Daniel considered lying, but the queen had the unsettling gaze of someone who could detect dishonesty through bone density. "A chamber," he admitted. "Dark walls, black crystals, a golden symbol above a sealed door." Vaelora's composure fractured. "That room has been hidden beneath this palace for 4,000 years. Daniel folded his arms. "Then your security needs improvement. Apparently, tourists can see through the floor." Serina stepped toward him. The queen raised a hand. "Serina, wait." The princess ignored her. She placed the damaged drone on the floor, approached Daniel, and examined his face with quiet concentration. Up close, he saw faint silver patterns moving beneath her skin like threads of light. Her long ears trembled slightly, betraying an emotion her expression concealed. Daniel crouched so they were at the same height. "Hello again," he said gently. Serina lifted one hand and made a sequence of gestures. Daniel did not understand them. Queen Vaelora did. Her face lost all color. "What did she say?" Daniel asked. The queen remained silent for several seconds. "She asked why you have taken so long to return." A vibration passed through the chamber. The floating crystals began rotating around Daniel. Ancient symbols appeared in the air, forming rings of golden light. The little maintenance drone scrambled behind Serina's feet and emitted a nervous beep. Then every crystal spoke with the same mechanical voice. "Bloodline resonance confirmed." Daniel stood slowly. "I assume that is bad." Queen Vaelora stared at the golden symbol burning above him. "No," she whispered, "it is impossible." The golden rings tightened around Daniel without touching him, turning slowly through the air as streams of ancient symbols passed over his skin. He felt no heat, but every scar on his body began to ache at once, including one on his shoulder. He had received years earlier when a rescue shuttle decided gravity was more of a suggestion than a law. The maintenance drone peeked from behind Serina's dress and emitted 3 worried chirps. Daniel glanced down at it. "At least someone here is reacting normally." Queen Vaelora moved toward the nearest crystal. "End the scan." The chamber ignored her. "Royal override," she said sharply. "Vaelora, 9th crown of Elythria." A pale blue light scanned her face. "Override denied," the chamber replied. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Your palace just told you no." Vaelora's long ears angled backward in irritation. "It has not done that before." "Congratulations. I seem to bring out independence in architecture." The symbols accelerated. A pressure entered Daniel's skull, followed by images that did not belong to him. A battlefield beneath a red sun. Human soldiers wearing unfamiliar armor. Elythrian warriors standing beside them rather than against them. A man with Daniel's face placed one hand upon a black crystal, while a woman wearing the first royal crown held a newborn child. Then came fire. A city collapsing inward. A fleet vanishing into a wound in space. The man turned toward Daniel as though he could see across thousands of years. "Find the child." Daniel staggered and Serina caught his hand. The moment their fingers touched, the chamber fell silent. Every crystal stopped rotating. The golden rings vanished. Serina stared at their joined hands. Her expression changed from concentration to recognition so deep that Daniel felt an unexpected chill. She squeezed his fingers, then slowly lifted her free hand. First she pointed at him. Then she placed 2 fingers near her chin and moved them outward. Finally, she touched her palm to her chest. Daniel looked toward Vaelora. "What does that mean?" The queen did not answer. Serina repeated the gestures more carefully this time. Her green eyes never left Daniel's face. Vaelora's breath caught. "No," she whispered. Daniel straightened. "That word seems popular today." The queen came closer, her composure slipping with every step. "Serina has never used that sign." "What sign?" Vaelora looked at their joined hands as though they were holding an explosive device. "Father." Daniel stared at her. The maintenance drone chirped once. He looked down at it, not helping. Serina smiled and repeated the sign. Father. The word seemed to strike the chamber harder than any weapon. Several crystals flared white, projecting fragments of an ancient recording into the air. A tall human stood beside an Elythrian queen whose long silver hair moved in the wind. Between them was a child with bright green eyes and delicate, elongated ears. The recording flickered, distorted by age. The silent air will recognize the guardian, the human said. Not by face, not by blood, by memory carried beyond death. The ancient queen placed her hand over the child's heart. When she calls him father, the sealed path will open. The image collapsed. A section of the chamber floor split apart with a deep mechanical groan. Black stairs descended into darkness, lit one by strips of golden energy. Daniel stared into the opening. I suppose this is the sealed path. Vaelora stepped between him and the stairs. You will not enter. Serina immediately tightened her grip on Daniel's hand. The queen looked at her daughter. This place was sealed before our present civilization existed. We do not know what is below. Serina pointed toward Daniel, then toward the stairs. Vaelora's long ears lowered. Daniel watched the silent exchange. I'm guessing she disagrees. She says you already know the way. I can barely find my room on this planet. The little drone crawled toward the stairwell, scanned the darkness, and hurried back behind Serina. Daniel nodded. Finally, a professional assessment. A sudden pulse rose from below. The chamber walls trembled and one of the black crystals cracked. From inside it came a whisper in a language Daniel had never learned but somehow understood. Guardian, descend. Pain flashed behind his eyes. Another memory surfaced. Himself or someone wearing his face, running down those same stairs while alarms screamed through the palace. He carried a small child in his arms. Behind him, something enormous moved through the shadows, scraping metal against stone. Daniel pulled his hand away from Serina without meaning to. The memory vanished. Serina's smile disappeared. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I saw something. Vaelora studied him. What? A child, this palace, something chasing us. The queen turned toward the open stairwell. From far below came a metallic impact, then another, slow, heavy, deliberate. The maintenance drone collapsed onto its side and played a cheerful evacuation melody. Daniel looked at it. Now you find your courage. Serina took his hand again. This time she signed only one word, together. Vaelora watched her daughter for a long moment, then drew a thin blade from the air itself. Liquid silver formed along her forearm, hardening into a weapon that hummed with contained energy. If the prophecy is wrong, she said, stepping toward the stairs, I will personally destroy whatever is beneath this palace. Daniel followed with Serina beside him. And if it is right? Vaelora looked back, her eyes reflecting the golden lights below. Then the man my daughter has called father may be the only reason our world survives the night. The stairs descended farther than the dimensions of the palace should have allowed. Daniel counted the first 100 steps, lost track near 200, and finally decided Elythrian architects had probably considered geometry a personal challenge. Golden strips of light awakened beneath their feet as they moved downward, while the darkness above closed behind them like a sealed mouth. Queen Vaelora led the way with her silver blade raised. Its edge projected a thin field of distorted air that made the stone walls shimmer. Serina remained between them, one hand holding Daniel's and the other carrying the damaged maintenance drone against her chest. The drone had stopped playing its evacuation melody, though every few seconds it emitted a pessimistic beep. Daniel glanced at it. You know, morale is usually part of the job. Vaelora did not look back. That machine cleans ventilation shafts. Then it is handling this better than I am. The metallic impacts below grew louder. They reached a circular landing where the stairs ended before a black door large enough to admit a starship. No handle marked its surface. No seam suggested how it might open. At its center glowed the same golden symbol Daniel had seen in his vision, two curved lines surrounding a human hand. Serina stepped forward. Vaelora caught her shoulder. No. The princess looked up at her mother and signed quickly. Daniel watched Vaelora's face. What did she say? She says the door has been waiting for you. That is flattering in a deeply threatening way. Daniel approached the symbol. The air became colder with each step. When he placed his palm against the door, the golden light spread beneath his skin and raced up his arm like liquid fire. Memories struck him without warning. He saw the ancient human again, standing inside a chamber filled with soldiers. The man's name surfaced in Daniel's mind. Elias Carter, his ancestor. Elias had not come to Elythria as an explorer. He had arrived aboard a dying colony vessel, pursued by an artificial intelligence known as the Hollow Mind, a weapon created during humanity's forgotten first age of interstellar travel. The machine had learned to invade biological memory, wearing the thoughts of the dead like borrowed clothing. Elythria had helped humanity imprison it. The royal prophecy had never been mystical. It had been a security protocol. Daniel tore his hand away. The door opened. Beyond it lay an underground city suspended inside a cavern of impossible size. Broken towers hung upside down from the ceiling. Bridges floated without supports. Rivers of pale energy flowed through the air, feeding a colossal black sphere at the center. Inside the sphere, something moved. Vaelora stared at the ruins. This place predates every known structure on Elythria. Daniel swallowed. Not every structure. He pointed toward a damaged emblem on the nearest tower. It bore the crest of the early human colonies. Before Vaelora could answer, the metallic sound came again. A guardian machine emerged from behind the tower. It stood nearly 4 meters tall, built from dark alloy and jointed limbs. Its head was smooth and featureless except for a single red eye. Ancient weapons unfolded from its shoulders and locked onto Daniel. Serina's drone squeaked and hid inside her sleeve. Daniel raised both hands. That seems reasonable. The machine spoke in a voice roughened by thousands of years of silence. Guardian identity incomplete. Vaelora moved in front of Serina. Do not fire. The machine ignored her. A beam scanned Daniel from head to toe. Genetic sequence compatible, memory sequence corrupted. Daniel frowned. Corrupted sounds rude. Verification required. A panel opened in the machine's chest, revealing a narrow slot filled with blue light. Daniel looked at it. What exactly am I supposed to put in there? The machine extended a blade. Vaelora raised her weapon. Serina stepped between them, the red eye focused on her. Air detected. She lifted her hands and signed. The guardian machine froze. Daniel turned to Vaelora. What did she tell it? The queen's expression was unreadable. She said you are her father. The machine lowered its blade. Relational designation accepted. Daniel stared. That is all it needed. The red eye shifted toward him. Parental responsibility transferred. A section of its chest opened, and the machine deposited a small glowing cube into Daniel's hands. He nearly dropped it. Apparently fatherhood comes with luggage. Serina smiled. Then the black sphere at the center of the city pulsed. Every floating bridge trembled. The rivers of energy reversed direction and began pouring into the sphere. Cracks of white light appeared across its surface. The guardian machine turned toward it. Containment failure imminent. Vaelora's blade brightened. What is inside? The machine answered without emotion. The hollow mind. A voice filled the cavern before Daniel could react. It sounded human. It sounded tired. It sounded exactly like him. Elias, the darkness whispered, you came back. The sphere split open. A wave of black particles erupted across the city and gathered above the ruined towers, shaping itself into thousands of human faces. Some screamed. Some laughed. Others simply watched. One face belonged to Daniel. Another belonged to Queen Vaelora. Then Serina appeared among them. The princess gripped Daniel's hand. The hollow mind spoke through her stolen image. Give me the silent air, and I will return every memory your bloodline has lost. Daniel stared at the false Serina floating above the city. Tempting offer, he said, but you made one mistake. The faces leaned closer. Daniel tightened his hold on the real princess's hand. My family has already met enough strange machines today. Black particles drifted through the underground city like living ash, joining and separating as though every grain carried its own mind. Thousands of stolen faces watched from the darkness above the broken towers. Some belonged to ancient Elythrians. Others were unmistakably human. Every expression smiled with unsettling calm. Daniel resisted the urge to wave. I've learned something today, he said quietly. Queen Vaelora kept her silver blade aimed at the swirling cloud. What? When an evil intelligence copies your face, it always chooses a less flattering angle. The hollow mind answered with Daniel's own voice. Humor, a primitive defense against fear. Daniel shrugged. It worked surprisingly well. Beside him, Serina silently laughed. Her shoulders trembled, and even in the middle of an ancient underground city threatened by an immortal machine, she couldn't completely hide her amusement. Queen Vaelora noticed. For a brief moment, the queen forgot the enemy before them. She had seen her daughter smile countless times throughout her life. She had seen her laugh without sound, but she had never seen Serina laugh this freely beside someone she had known for only a few hours. The realization struck harder than the hollow mind's threats. The guardian machine stepped forward, placing itself between the travelers and the black sphere. Containment integrity, 12%. Its voice crackled. Estimated collapse, 23 minutes. Daniel looked at the glowing cube still resting in his hand. So, what exactly does this thing do? The Guardian's red eye focused on the cube. Memory key. That explains absolutely nothing. It unlocks biological archives. Daniel blinked. I now understand slightly more than absolutely nothing. Without warning, the cube floated from his palm and unfolded into dozens of shimmering fragments. Tiny beams of blue light surrounded Daniel's head. Another memory arrived. Not a vision this time, a complete memory. He stood inside this very city thousands of years earlier. He wore different clothing, yet somehow remained himself. Around him stood humans and Elythrians working together. Engineers adjusted enormous crystalline generators while scientists argued over impossible equations. Queen Vaelora was nowhere to be seen. Instead, another queen stood beside him. She looked astonishingly similar to Vaelora, though slightly older, her long silver hair braided with golden threads. Queen Elythria, the first ruler of United Elythria. She smiled at Daniel, or rather at Elia's Carter. You worry too much, she said. The prison isn't finished. It doesn't need to be perfect. It does if the hollow mind ever escapes. She gently placed her hand upon his shoulder. Then promise me something. What? If our descendants fail, yours and mine must succeed. The memory shattered. Daniel gasped. Vaelora steadied him. What did you see? He looked directly into her eyes. Our families knew each other. The queen frowned. That is impossible. I don't think they just knew each other. He hesitated. I think they built this prison together. Far above them, the hollow mind laughed. Its laughter echoed from every ruined tower. Yes, remember. Remember everything. Black tendrils descended toward the city streets. The guardian machine immediately opened hidden compartments along its arms. Bright blue cannons emerged with mechanical precision. Defensive protocol initiated. Energy bolts erupted into the darkness. The tendrils dissolved into clouds of glittering particles, only to reform seconds later. Daniel watched in disbelief. It doesn't stay dead. It was never alive, Vaelora answered. One tendril slipped past the guardian and rushed toward Serina. Daniel reacted instinctively. He stepped in front of her. The glowing cube exploded with brilliant white light. The tendril froze only centimeters from his face. Then, it began changing. Instead of darkness, silver light spread through it. The hollow mind recoiled. No. Its countless voices merged into one. That signal cannot exist. Daniel stared at the cube. I wish someone would explain what I'm doing. The guardian answered immediately. You are remembering. The silver light expanded outward in a growing circle. Every machine buried beneath the ancient city awakened simultaneously. Lights appeared inside abandoned towers. Bridges realigned. Power flowed once again through the floating rivers. The underground city was coming back to life. Serina squeezed Daniel's hand excitedly before pointing toward the center of the cavern. The massive black sphere had stopped cracking. Instead, the prison itself was rebuilding. Layer after layer of glowing crystalline armor formed around it. The hollow mind shrieked. "You cannot restore what time has destroyed." Daniel looked at the rebuilding prison. "I don't know." He smiled. "People rebuild things all the time." The maintenance drone suddenly rolled forward. Nobody noticed it, not even the hollow mind. The tiny machine disappeared beneath the enormous sphere. 3 seconds later, it proudly emitted a cheerful beep, then accidentally activated every forgotten maintenance protocol in the city. Thousands of cleaning drones burst from hidden tunnels. Tiny machines filled the air in endless swarms. They immediately began repairing walls, replacing damaged crystal panels, sweeping debris, polishing ancient statues. One particularly enthusiastic drone started cleaning the Guardian machine's leg while it was aiming its cannons. The Guardian looked down. Maintenance request, poorly timed. Daniel couldn't stop laughing. Even Queen Vaelora smiled despite herself. Serina laughed silently so hard that tears formed in her eyes. For the first time in thousands of years, the underground city echoed with something stronger than fear: hope. High above them, however, the hollow mind slowly withdrew into the heart of the prison. Its final whisper drifted across the cavern. "You have repaired my cage." A long silence followed. Then came the answer. "But you have also awakened the final lock." Deep beneath the sphere, something unimaginably large opened its eyes. The eyes beneath the sphere were not biological. They were 2 enormous lenses buried under the city, each one filled with rotating constellations. As they opened, the cavern shifted around them. Broken towers locked into alignment, floating bridges curved inward, and the rivers of pale energy formed a vast luminous ring around the hollow mind's prison. The Guardian machine lowered its weapons, final lock active. Daniel looked at the cosmic eyes below. "And the final lock is judgment." "Of course it is. Nothing ancient ever activates a comfortable chair." Queen Vaelora stepped closer to the memory key. "Whose judgment?" The Guardian turned its red eye toward Serina. "The silent heir." The princess became still. The hollow mind surged against its new crystalline shell, filling the cavern with stolen voices. "She cannot judge me. She has no voice." Serina's fingers tightened around Daniel's hand. He felt her fear, not through telepathy or machinery, but in the small tremor she could not hide. Until that moment, everyone had treated her silence as a mystery to solve, a wound to heal, or a prophecy to interpret. Daniel finally understood that none of those explanations truly belonged to her. He crouched before her. "You do not have to speak," he said. "You never did." Serina searched his face. Behind them, the Guardian announced, "Containment failure in 4 minutes." Daniel glanced over his shoulder. "Your timing remains excellent." The maintenance drone beeped proudly from beneath the sphere, having apparently repaired a light panel no one had noticed was broken. Daniel turned back to Serina. "Whatever happens, choose because it is your decision. Not because an old machine, an old prophecy, or a very nervous visiting human tells you to." Serina looked at Vaelora. The queen lowered her blade. For years, Vaelora had protected her daughter so fiercely that protection had become another kind of wall. Her eyes filled with regret as she knelt beside them. "I feared the galaxy would see your silence as weakness," she said, "so I tried to speak for you before anyone could misunderstand." Serina touched her mother's cheek. Then she signed slowly. "You heard me. You were only afraid." Vaelora closed her eyes as tears slipped down her face. The hollow mind struck the prison again. Cracks spread across the outer crystal. "Serina," Daniel said softly, "what do you want?" The princess released his hand. For a heartbeat, Daniel feared she was stepping away from him. Instead, she walked toward the sphere. The black particles pressed against the transparent shell, shaping themselves into Elias Carter, Queen Elythria, Vaelora, and finally Daniel. "You called him father," the false Daniel said. "But he is not. His memories are borrowed. His place beside you is a mistake." Serina lifted both hands. The ancient city watched. She pointed to Daniel, then to her heart. "Father is not blood." She pointed toward the memory key, "not memory." Then she placed one palm over the other, forming the sign she had used on the stairs. Together, the cosmic lenses beneath the city blazed. The guardian's voice changed, becoming warmer, almost human. "Judgment accepted." The hollow mind screamed. Golden light passed through the prison, separating the intelligence from every stolen memory it had consumed. Millions of images poured from the sphere like stars escaping a dying sun. Ancient humans, Elythrians, vanished cities, forgotten names and voices. All were transferred into the archive of echoes, where they could be preserved without being controlled. The hollow mind shrank until it became a single black point. "You cannot destroy fear," it whispered. Daniel stepped beside Serina. "No," he said, "but we can stop letting it make decisions." The black point vanished. Silence followed. Then every cleaning drone in the city began playing a victory melody at a slightly different speed. Queen Vaelora stared at the noisy swarm. "Can they be stopped?" The Guardian machine considered this. "No." Daniel smiled. "Then peace has a soundtrack." Weeks later, the truth of Elythria's past was revealed. Humans had reached the planet thousands of years before official history claimed, and Daniel's ancestor had helped seal the hollow mind beside Queen Elythria. The prophecy had not predicted a lost warrior returning from death. It had described a future bond strong enough to awaken the Royal Defense Network. Daniel was offered medals, titles, and a ceremonial estate with walls that occasionally moved when bored. He declined most of them. He accepted one position, permanent human envoy to Elythria. Ambassador Harlan pretended this was a diplomatic strategy rather than an obvious excuse for Daniel to remain near the royal family. Serina began attending council sessions beside her mother. She still never spoke, but new translation crystals projected her gestures as light across the chamber, forcing ministers to pay attention. She quickly became famous for ending arguments with a single look, and for reprogramming official drones to interrupt speeches that exceeded 10 minutes. Vaelora became less guarded, though she continued watching Daniel whenever he and Serina worked together in the palace gardens. One evening beneath 3 silver moons, Serina handed Daniel a small object. It was the repaired maintenance drone. On its polished shell she had engraved a human word, "Dad." Daniel stared at it for a long moment. "You know," he said, "on Earth, fathers usually receive a badly painted cup." Serina smiled and signed, "You are on Elythria." Vaelora approached from behind them. "Is the title acceptable?" Daniel looked at the queen, then at the child who had recognized him before he understood himself. He had arrived as a visitor who kept distance from everything he could not explain. He remained because he had learned that family was not always inherited, destiny was not always mystical, and silence was not emptiness. He took Serina's hand. "It is the greatest title I have ever been given." The drone beeped, sprayed antiseptic across his jacket, and rolled away. Serina laughed without sound. This time the whole palace understood her.